Hello, and welcome to Shieldwall100's review of Smog the 13th Hour, aka Smog 1888, or just simply Smog. This game comes to us from Smart Max, who are a French outfit with some very talented people. Smog the 13th Hour is a miniature skirmish game of sorts. I mean, it's played on a gridded map, but it's not a board game, so miniatures game is what I'm going with. It's set in an alternative Victorian London, and I think that's very sporting given the French origin. Now, normally I describe the game and setting before looking at the pieces, but in this case I'm going to make an exception. The model range for Smog was around for several years before a game was released, and it's a mark of their quality that they were able to trade as a company solely on these pretty specialist miniatures. Now, I consider myself an average painter, with the occasional moment of woohoo, but I hope that I can get across the pure awesomeness of the sculpting and care that has gone into these figures. Far better examples can be found online though. Check the description for relevant websites. The Smart Max Facebook page also has some pretty breathtaking stuff, if you don't mind a good dose of paintbrush envy. When describing the style of the figures, it's tempting just to put the steampunk label on them, but there are lots of other influences across the range, from ancient Egyptian to gothic horror, and Victoriana prevalent throughout. But regardless of which model you look at, the crazy is always cranked up to 11. Every model has its own individual character, and this is helped by the nominal scale being set at 54mm, much larger than most of us will be used to. The individuality of the models is reflected in the game rules too, because although there are factions, these seem only to have a presence in the background and no influence at all on the rules. In fact, the manufacturer encourages you to mix and match in any way you choose, to create your league of extraordinary gentlemen or women. So if you see a couple of models you like, you can buy them without worrying about whether you can use them together or not. A nice bit of awareness in the part of the Smart Max, I think. Equally, you aren't forced to buy any models just to finish off a crew or gang. Of course, an obsessive compulsion to buy and paint the most rewarding painting challenges that you've faced could force you to buy them, but that would be this guy I know, who totally isn't me. The material used is a good quality resin, and to date the quality control has been very high. The joins fit together cleanly, and being resin, superglue bonds everything very quickly indeed. There are of course some small snags in that some of the parts are so small so as to be quite fragile, and it would have been nice to have some assembly instructions, at least online. It's good to have spares, don't get me wrong, but please tell me so before I spend half an hour trawling the internet for images on where hypodermic number 3 goes. So, the game itself. I honestly did not know what to expect when I picked this up at Salute a full 2 years after getting the first models. I can list the rough box contents from memory. 3 smallish decks of cards, a rules booklet, and a gridded map. I could admit to feeling a little underwhelmed, but the presentation is very nice, and in keeping with the aesthetic of the world Smart Max have created. But let's see if the gameplay is worth more than just the components. I'll start with the character stat cards. A handful are included in the game box, and they're all viewable on the Smart Max store. I'll use the Lord Holmes character as an example. I'll start in the bottom left corner, and this is the model's action points. It's quite simply how much stuff can be done in a turn. Moving a space is one action point, and so is performing an action like casting a spell or attacking any character in close combat. Some actions can only be performed once per turn. The action points number is also used to work out which side gets to move first. Following on from this, the 3 numbers along the top indicate how good the character is when performing actions. From left to right we have hand to hand, ether or magic, and marksmanship, which is shooting. In a nutshell, the numbers indicate the damage done by a successful attack of that type. So Holmes here would do 2 points of damage if he struck another model in close combat, but you can see that his specialty is in his skills as a marksman. Below the portrait is the model's prestige value. This is Smog's version of points as you'd see them in other games. Lord Holmes is a very versatile character and weighs in at 100 prestige, and most other characters average much lower. The hand symbol contains the figure's level of inspiration, which exactly translates into the number of action cards a character contributes to your total hand. I'll go into the cards later, but suffice to say the more the better. The number to the centre right is the character's life points. When he or she sustains this much damage, then the model is removed from the board. Finally, each character has a unique trait which modifies or bends the rules in some manner. This represents their specific talent, and I'm not going to dwell on them here because there are many and varied. The 3 card decks each correspond directly with one of the 3 action statistics I mentioned before. hand-to-hand, ether, and marksmanship. Each card has one action of its type listed on the upper part of the card, and a counter on the bottom part of the card. So if we take a straightforward hand-to-hand card, this one could be used to make a low attack by a character in his turn, or the player may have to use it to parry a low attack against one of his own characters when his opponent activates a model. Once the card is used, it's discarded. There is great variety in each of the action decks, and the most powerful attacks are often paired with the best defensive moves too, so you have constant choices to make depending on your style of play. You have to nominate how many of each action deck you're going to draw at the beginning of each turn. So if you choose to stack up on magical ether cards to buff your models or attack your opponents, you may leave yourself exposed to close combat attacks from gorillas wielding lampposts. Yes, there is a gorilla wielding a lamppost in the range, and a very nice hat he has too. Okay, I'm going to run through a very quick gameplay example. Lord Holmes has been pursuing the dastardly Shamrock the Great, and the tonsorially challenged magician activates with his 4 action points. He spends 3 of them to move, and then casts a spell using one of his owner's ether cards. Looking at the top part only, we can see that the spell is Deadly Curls of Smog, and unless Holmes counters it, he will take damage equal to Shamrock's ether level of 1. Well, Holmes has 4 life points, but nonetheless doesn't fancy the thought of losing any of them, so he only reacts with a simple objection counter, nullifying the attack. It's worth noting that if Holmes didn't have an ether value, then he would not have been allowed to even attempt to stop the magical attack. This finishes Shamrock's activation, and then we'll assume that Lord Holmes activates next. Holmes's player recalls that his opponent only drew 1 marksmanship card at the start of the turn, as a token defence only, and he hopes that it will turn out to be of no use. Holmes moves up a space, and then plays a firing card with range 4, meaning that he can shoot at something up to 4 spaces away, so Shamrock is certainly in danger. Shamrock's player looks at his marksmanship card and lays it down to reveal the overload counter. The shot hits, but the firer also loses a life point. Holmes sustains the damage easily, but Shamrock will suffer the full force of the impact. The Imperial Assassin's marksmanship of 3 deals that many points of damage to the headless Houdini, more than enough to take him down and remove him from the game. That was a very quick rundown of an encounter, but I'm sure you'll appreciate the possibilities with several characters on each side, let alone introducing a 3rd or 4th player into the mix. What I find to be surprising is the amount of fun and variation present in the game when the models have such relatively few statistics. The thematic flavour of the world certainly adds to the entertainment provided. It's certainly dark like a Dickensian nightmare should be. To anyone even vaguely interested, I can recommend a jaunt around the game's website, and I shall link from the description. Of course, it's not all hookers and cocaine, there are some negatives as well. The game map does rather limit the diversity of your games, and it's only one-sided. I know small companies can only do so much, but please, would it not have been possible to print the game board double-sided? From a gameplay perspective, my opponents and I have noticed that once one side has lost a figure, it becomes really difficult to redress the balance if you can't do it straight away. What was a finely poised game can end very suddenly as one team crumples like a house of cards. There's also the fact that, as well as being a draw for people like me, the very quality of the models could seem daunting for the beginner or even moderate collector. I would agree that this really is a system for experienced modelers and painters, although don't be put off just because you don't actually consider yourself a professional standard. If you put the same amount of time into one of these beauties as you would, say, a decent squad of Space Marines, then you'll be surprised at what you can pull off. The confidence I've gained from this range has actually fed back into other projects with smaller miniatures. Okay, one of the factors I like to address when I review a game is the cost. Most of us have budgets. I mean, I have a full-time job and I can appreciate the value of money. If a game isn't good value, then there are plenty of alternatives out there that are. I won't lie to you, Smog isn't cheap. The box rule set is at least self-contained, but the price of the models ranges from to I hope that I may have indicated to you that this is a premium end collection, and that you only need to have a minimum of 2 models per side to play, but forget about collecting a full range unless you own a medium to large size football club. One thing to mitigate the cost is that these are not just gaming pieces, these are genuine display items. Steampunk is actually enjoying something of a resurgence in popularity of late, and you'd probably get more kudos with a shelf of these from the uninitiated viewer before she smiles and walks away than your 1750 point tournament winning Grey Knight army, even though you tried really hard on Caldor Drago's sword. So in conclusion, this time is ideally suited to those who like the aesthetic, which is really easy to like. The rules are not perfectly balanced, but they suit the models down to the ground. In this hobby you always get more out the more you put in, and this is especially true of Smog the 13th Hour. The painted miniatures are not something you store away in a case, you proudly display them for the world to see. I hope you found this video informative, and I bid you good day. Goodbye.